Welcome back to Fleet Mood. Today we will talk about sustainable development goals and how and why they should also affect the fleet industry. My name is Damen and I represent Fleet 360.
Yeah, and I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet Magazine. I'm going to be giving the North American perspective. So let's start this conversation about an area that might not be very familiar with a lot of North American viewers, but it's this whole area of sustainable development goals, or it's known as SDG. And this came out of the Rome Agreement in 2019. I was wondering, as background or as context for our viewers, Hans, could you give us some information on what that entails and how that might be implemented in affecting fleet operations in the US and in the European markets?
Yeah, more than happy to, and I do appreciate that there will be a difference, which we will explore in this conversation between Europe and the US. So sustainable development goals are really about making this world a better place. You know, it starts with lesser poverty, no hunger, good health, and so on, but also diversity, stable economic growth, and a better place to live in. Clearly, key driver here for directly to fleet is potentially what is the perception of people, greenhouse gases, and so on. But the SDGs go a lot further. They also talk about good working environment, taking care of your people, etc. So it's a rather wide scope of, in total, 17 key areas that companies can focus on to meet those social development or those sustainable development goals.
So in terms of fleet, what are some of the important key areas that govern and will impact fleet operations?
Yeah, you know, what you see a lot is that clearly companies focus to reduce their CO2 footprint or their greenhouse gas footprint, their NOx footprint, and so on, which is great. It's a good step in the right direction. And also with leasing companies, you know, they do good reporting on what they have achieved together with their customers to further bring this to a more acceptable level of output. Mm-hmm. Then again, there is an area that is not that well explored or not very well addressed at the moment. And this is, okay, how do you deal then with your own people in the company, but also your supply chain? So I'm not sure if that's on top of mind in the US as well, Mike.
It's becoming more.
Yeah.
Yeah, with these supply constraints going on, supply chain is starting to gain greater awareness among people and its implications. So in terms of these SDG goals, are they voluntary or are these mandates in the European market?
No, they are voluntary to a degree when you sign up for those United Nations SDG. That's a voluntary program. You then need to report on it. So that's not voluntary anymore. Then you have to stick to them and do your reporting based on it. But to start a program is on a voluntary basis. Now, of course, with most leasing companies in Europe being part of banks and so on, or bigger global conglomerates of manufacturers, they are already adhering to many goals for a better world. But the SDGs, as I said, they go a step further and they also push those suppliers to look at their supply chain. And I think that's one of the key challenges still, because if I can expand on it a little bit more,
please.
What we see is that, you know, when you as a leasing company just only maintain your own economic principles to be more profitable, it very often means is that there's a continuous squeeze on your supply chain, being workshops that carry out the maintenance for you and so on. And if you continue to squeeze margins in that direction to either maintain your own cost level or even improve your own profit levels, it does mean that those suppliers have to then rethink their own strategy and, for example, tell their employees, sorry guys, the rates that we're now getting are less, and therefore you have to either work harder or take less salary. And that can never be the case. That is the opposite effect. So, and that's the challenge here. Even applying to what materials will be used, what tires will be used. Is that tire manufacturer the proper manufacturer to put those tires on, to fit those tires? Because those tire manufacturers could be having a rather polluting production process. Same applies for the recycling of oil, etc., etc. So there's a lot to it that you have to oversee.
Well, and it seems like a daunting task for a fleet manager in order to stay on top of all that. I'm procuring tires, but now, I need to have responsibility on where those tires are made, how they were made, all the way back, I guess, to the rubber plantations, and how labor was hired there. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually it is. And we do, of course, see that as a daunting task. And perhaps we should not overstep ourselves here. But what is important is that you at least start the dialogue now. Start talking to your provider. Start talking to your leasing companies. Okay, is this on top of your mind? Is this what you are looking at yourself? Tell me about it. This is something that you report on. Because in the end, especially when you also work for governments and so on, some of those areas you need to report on a mandatory basis. So even when you are a customer of a leasing company, but you also have a governmental contract, you might be asked those questions. And you have to go back then to your provider to see if they're meeting those objectives. And you have to ask them to go a little bit further in their discussion with you. Okay, and how do you deal with your suppliers? What tires are we fitting? What oil change programs do we adhere to? Very simple stuff. When a leasing company says, no, don't replace the filters of a car yet, because I can save some money by doing it 10 or 20,000 kilometers later. It does mean is that the whole, for an internal combustion engine, the whole burning process is less lean, and therefore fuel consumption might go up and the pollution goes up. So all these areas kind of interact with sustainable development goals. And as you asked, can a fleet manager oversee all of this? No, certainly not. But talk to your suppliers about it. We think that is an important element to do.
Yeah, but when you look at the supply chain and you start recommending changes to the companies that are part of your supply chain in order to become more sustainable, have more diversity, be more equitable in the pay for its workers, those costs ultimately are going to be passed on to you as the end user. What kind of impact is that having on corporate margins, or is that part of this agreement, willing to live with lower profits, lower margins in order to attain these larger societal goals?
Yeah, that's a key challenge, and there's numerous debates going on this topic, where economic experts are battling around. Okay, so what is the price of a more healthy environment, and who should invest? And if we all maintain to work on a more economic, self-centered approach, and I know that doesn't sound very pleasant, but it is the case, then we're not going to get there. Only if we're willing to take a lesser margin. So don't think about passing on cost yet directly, but we can all decide to take and accept a lesser margin. And therefore, there is not a big ripple effect to push all those costs onto the fleet manager that is actually trying to do the best possible thing. So it's a fine balance that we need to address. It's not impossible, but as I said, if we continue to maintain a self-centered approach, we're not going to get there.
Right. But this is through the support of your senior management. They're providing higher budgets to fleet managers in order to compensate for these decreased margins. Is that what's happening in Europe?
Yes, certainly. If you look at the initial electrification, budgets were made available from governments, in their rules and regulations, but also through the companies themselves. They clearly have given fleet managers budget to say, okay, we understand the battery EV has a higher budget at the moment. We're happy to support that. So at least it gets the industry going. It's, those market leaders, those innovators that bring us the product that we need to have. And that initially it's at a higher cost, but in the end, it will create a better world for all of us.
Hans, are there any companies in Europe that are leading the way in adopting SDG goals?
Certainly. Interestingly, because we had this conversation with Mario Moses in Miami at the Global Fleet Conference, where he explained their process on how to approach the implementation of the electrification of fleet globally. So probably we can put that into this episode as a short clip.
So we've ranked our countries on a red, amber, green analysis with some of our external partners. And in Europe already, we have made great headway this past year moving to electric. And we're moving into the other markets, North America being an amber market. We're looking at that for next year. and we're excited about it.
So we have a big Latin American presence here. What color would be Mexico or Brazil, for instance?
So Mexico's amber, Brazil is red. The Latin markets are kind of mostly red and amber, and we're doing our analysis there. Mexico, again, underway, getting ready, positioned to move to some EVs.
So thank you all for watching today's episode. If you like what we're doing here, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe if you want to be notified for the next episode to be uploaded.
Very good. We'll see you in the next episode then.